When Joe's nephew started working at his uncle's company, he noticed something unusual. His 72-year-old uncle wasn't just a security expert. Naval terminology, weapons safety, command structure. These weren't things you learned in civilian life. Joseph Sullivan had been running a security company in Clearwater for 20 years. At 72, he was a gray-haired, disciplined man. His clients knew him as one of the most reliable experts in the industry. He had never married but treated his brother's son David like his own. David had recently started working at his uncle's company and began noticing strange things. Joe's way of speaking, the orders he gave, his obsession with procedures. This wasn't just civilian security experience. It was like he came from another world. Until David found his uncle's old photographs. Welcome to the Last Stand channel. Do you have an elderly relative in your family who doesn't share much about their military background? Have you ever wondered about their experiences? Share in the comments. Joseph "Joe" Sullivan owned Gulf Coast Security, Clearwater's most respected security company. He had been running the business since 1984, and it was one of Florida's most trusted security firms. Physically, Joe looked quite fit for a 72-year-old man. Medium height, proper posture, always dressed neatly. His hair had turned completely gray, but he still stood straight, moving with discipline even when walking. His company was located near Clearwater Marina. The office was small but organized. Security certificates, achievement documents, and customer thank you letters hung on the walls. But what stood out was how Joe organized everything with military precision. Joe's clients were mostly large companies, hotels, and marina operators in the Clearwater area. His security services were considered the standard in the industry. Clients found Joe not only experienced, but also highly reliable. His closest family was his brother's son, David Sullivan. David was 28 years old, a college graduate, a young man. His father had died at a young age, and Joe had become a father figure to him. David had started working at his uncle's company 2 years ago. Initially, David knew his uncle only as a successful businessman, but since he started working at the company, he began noticing strange things. Joe's behavior, speaking style, and way of doing business were unusual. The first thing he noticed was Joe's use of terminology. He constantly used words like perimeter, watch, deck duty. David initially thought these were normal in the security industry, but over time, he realized these terms were different. Joe used naval terminology. Expressions like portside, starboard, bow, stern were frequently heard in the office. Why would a security company owner use naval terminology? Another characteristic of Joe's was his discipline. Everything in the office was in perfect order. Files arranged alphabetically, reports written in standard formats, appointments kept punctually. This level of organization was unusual. The training he gave to security personnel was also different. Joe didn't just teach basic security rules. He was very detailed about teamwork, chain of command, and procedure compliance. It was as if he was training a military unit. David also admired his uncle's knowledge of weapons safety. Joe was incredibly experienced in weapon handling, maintenance, and safety protocols. But where had he learned all this? One day, while David was going through old folders in his uncle's office, he found something interesting. There was a file full of old photographs and documents. In the photos, a young Joe appeared, but his uniform wasn't familiar. In one photograph, Joe was standing on a ship at sea. He was wearing a Navy uniform, and next to him was a sign that read USS Maddox. David was surprised. His uncle had never mentioned working in the Navy. In other photographs, he saw Joe on different ships. In some, he appeared giving weapon training, in others doing security checks. These photos seemed to be from the 1970s. David found the most interesting document at the bottom of the file. It was a certificate that read, Navy Master at Arms. Joseph Sullivan's name was on it. The date covered the period from 1968, 1975. David couldn't ignore these documents. His uncle had served in the Navy and as a Master at Arms. This was a very important position. Why had he never mentioned it? That evening, David decided to talk to his uncle. Joe was at home watching television. David came to him with the photographs. Uncle Joe, I found some of your old photos in the office today. Joe looked up. When he saw the photos, his expression changed. Where did you find these? They were in an old file. What is this USS Maddox? Did you work in the Navy? Joe remained silent for a long time. Then he took a deep breath. Yes, that was a long time ago. Why didn't you ever tell me? What does Master at Arms mean? The past stays in the past, David. It doesn't matter anymore. But David insisted. It matters to me. You're my role model. I want to know about your past. Joe looked at the photographs. Old memories were coming back. Master at Arms is the person responsible for security and discipline on the ship. Weapons safety, personnel training, security protocols. All of that was our responsibility. David listened with curiosity. Which ships did you work on? USS Maddox, USS Turner Joy, USS Gridley. I served in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War. Vietnam? This is very important. Joe hesitated. Vietnam wasn't an easy period, David. That's why I don't like to talk about it much. But Uncle, you're a hero. You served your country. I'm not a hero. I just did my duty. David wanted to learn more. What were the missions like? What did you experience? Joe hesitated. He was remembering memories he hadn't shared with anyone for 50 years. In 1968, I was assigned as Master at Arms on the USS Maddox. Our ship was patrolling Southeast Asian waters. David listened carefully. My job was to ensure ship security training for 300 crew members, weapon maintenance, security protocols. It was a lot of responsibility. Was it dangerous? Yes, very dangerous. The Vietnam War was ongoing. There was always a risk of enemy attack. Joe continued, looking at the photographs. One day, we experienced a very critical situation. What happened? In March 1969, we were patrolling Southeast Asian waters. A suspicious boat was detected on radar. David listened with excitement. The boat was approaching our ship but wasn't identifying itself. The captain called me. Sullivan, initiate security protocol, he said. What did you do? I put the crew on alert positions. I prepared the weapon stations. We sent a warning signal to the suspicious boat. Joe's voice became serious. But the boat continued to approach. That's when we realized this was an attack attempt. An attack? Yes. The enemy had targeted our ship. I activated the security protocol. The crew took their positions. Defense preparations were completed. David held his breath. What was the outcome? The engagement lasted 45 minutes. But because the crew was trained, there was no panic. The security procedures worked perfectly. Did you protect the ship? Yes. We didn't lose anyone. We drove off the enemy boat. David was impressed. Incredible. You're a real hero. No, David. I just applied my training. The crew were the heroes. They trusted the training and did their jobs. After this conversation, David began to see his uncle differently. Joe wasn't just a successful businessman. He was a veteran who had served his country, who had served in war. In the following days, David began asking more questions. Joe was initially reluctant, but gradually began to open up. I served in Vietnam for a total of 7 years, Joe said. I worked as Master at Arms on 3 different ships. Which was the most difficult assignment? The period when I served on USS Turner Joy. Between 1970, 1975. The war was very intense during that time. Joe paused, remembering. Turner Joy had a crew of 250. I was responsible for all their security training. What kind of training was it? Weapon safety, emergency procedures, teamwork, chain of command. I taught everything. David was curious. Do the systems in your current company come from there? Joe smiled. Yes, I adapted the discipline and systems I learned in the Navy to civilian life. That's why you're so successful. Maybe. The Navy taught me a lot. Discipline, responsibility, teamwork. David asked another question. Why did you never get married, Uncle? Joe remained silent. This was a personal question. I changed after the war. It became difficult to get close to people. You and your father are my family. David was moved. He understood his uncle's sacrifices. A few days later, David began telling his friends about his uncle's story. Word spread, and people in Clearwater began to see Joe differently. Joe didn't want this. David, why did you tell everyone? Because, Uncle, people should know who you are. You're a hero. I don't want heroism. I just want to do my job. But it was too late now. The operators at Clearwater Marina had learned about Joe's background. Their approach toward him changed. Marina manager Bob Martinez came to Joe. "Joe, I didn't know you had a Navy background. Would you share this experience with us?" Joe hesitated. "What do you mean, Bob? Could you give us training on marina security? Your experience is very valuable." Joe thought about it. Maybe sharing his experiences would be good. "Okay, I can do that." The first training was held on the weekend. 15 operators from the marina participated. Joe taught them about maritime security, docking procedures, emergency protocols. The participants were amazed by Joe's knowledge. "Where did you learn all this, Joe?" someone asked. "I served 7 years as Master-at-Arms in the Navy during the Vietnam War." Everyone was surprised. They had known Joe for 20 years but didn't know this. After the training, the marina operators requested more training from Joe. "These topics are very valuable. We want to learn more." Joe agreed. He started monthly maritime security training sessions. These trainings were so successful that requests began coming from other marinas too. It became clear that Joe was an expert. 6 months later, the Florida Marine Security Association contacted Joe. "Mr. Sullivan, we want to meet with you." Joe went to the meeting. Association President Dave Wilson welcomed him. "Joe, your marina security trainings are very successful. Would you do consulting for us?" "What kind of consulting?" "We want to develop marina security standards throughout Florida. Your Navy experience is very valuable." Joe accepted. Now he was doing maritime security consulting not just in Clearwater but throughout Florida. This work gave Joe a new sense of meaning. His Navy experience from 50 years ago was now being used in civilian life. David watched his uncle's transformation. "Uncle, you look very happy." "Yes, David, it feels good to share my experiences." "Why didn't you do it before?" "Because I thought I had left the past behind, but you showed me that experiences are valuable." A year later, Joe received a phone call from Washington. The caller was from the Naval Historical Foundation. "Mr. Sullivan, we learned that you served as Master-at-Arms during the Vietnam period." Joe was surprised. "Yes, that's correct. We have a veteran oral history program. We'd like to record your experiences." Joe hesitated. "Why?" "Because the Vietnam experiences of Master-at-Arms are very poorly documented. Your story is valuable for future generations." Joe accepted. When he went to Washington, he wasn't just going to tell his story. When he met with Sarah Williams, the Naval Historical Foundation coordinator, Sarah noticed the sadness on Joe's face. "Mr. Sullivan, is something bothering you? You seem to hesitate when telling your story." Joe remained silent for a long time. Then he told the truth he hadn't shared with anyone for 50 years. "When I left the Navy in 1975, it wasn't a clean departure." Sarah was curious. "What do you mean?" "During my last assignment on USS Turner Joy, an incident occurred. A soldier from the crew violated weapon safety rules. I reported it." Joe's voice was trembling. "But that soldier was the commander's relative. My report was ignored. They even accused me of unnecessary harshness. That's terrible. Worse, a month later there was an accident because of the safety rules that soldier neglected. 2 sailors were injured." Joe's eyes filled with tears. "I could have prevented that accident, but no one listened. You did the right thing, but I felt worthless for 50 years. I left the Navy with disappointment. I tried to do the right thing but was punished." Sarah checked the files. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm looking at your records. You left with honorable discharge. Honorable discharge." Joe was surprised. "But those reports aren't in the records. On the contrary, you have an outstanding service note, excellent service." Joe couldn't believe it. The disappointment he had carried for 50 years was based on a false perception. Sarah did more detailed research. A week later, she called Joe. "Mr. Sullivan, I discovered something very important about that commander." Joe was curious. "What did you discover?" "Commander Anderson was court-martialed in 1976 on charges of favoritism and security violations." Joe's world changed. "So my reports were correct." "Not only correct, you're a hero. You tried to prevent that accident." But the accident happened. It wasn't your fault. Anderson intimidated you to silence you. But the truth came out in 1976. Joe breathed easily for the first time in 50 years. 2 months later, Joe received an unexpected phone call. The caller was Admiral Patricia Hayes from the Pentagon. "Mr. Sullivan, I want to talk about your service on USS Turner Joy." Joe became anxious. "Is there a problem?" "Quite the opposite. Your 1975 report changed Navy security protocols." Joe was surprised. "What do you mean?" "After the Anderson case, new procedures were developed for security violations. Your report was the basis for this change." "I didn't know this." "You didn't know for 50 years, but now it's time to thank you." A month later, Joe was invited to Washington, D.C. A special ceremony would be held at the Pentagon. David came with his uncle. "Uncle, are you excited?" "I'm scared, David, after 50 years. There were 200 people in the ceremony hall. Active duty sailors, retired officers, Navy officials. Admiral Hayes took the stage. "Today we're witnessing a very special day, a 50-year delayed thank you." They called Joe to the stage. His hands were trembling. "Joseph Sullivan, in 1975, while serving on USS Turner Joy, you reported security violations. Your commander at the time tried to silence you." The hall was silent. "But your courage changed Navy security protocols. Thousands of sailors' lives were saved." Tears were streaming from Joe's eyes. "We're 50 years late, but today we're giving you the Navy's highest civilian honor medal." When the medal was pinned, Joe was trembling. 50 years of disappointment was ending. After the ceremony, David hugged his uncle. Both were crying. "Uncle, why didn't you ever tell me? Did you carry this sadness alone for 50 years?" "I was sad, David. I felt worthless." "You were wronged. You were a hero." Joe looked at his nephew. "You taught me to face my past. This medal is because of you." David was proud. "I've never seen you this happy." When they returned to Clearwater, there was a surprise welcome. Hundreds of people had gathered at the marina. Bob Martinez took the microphone. Joe Sullivan, Clearwater's hero. He returned from the Pentagon with a medal. The crowd was applauding. When Joe took the stage, he was emotional. "For 50 years, I had a disappointment I kept hidden. I thought I was worthless." The crowd listened silently. "But I learned that doing the right thing sometimes hurts. But eventually, the truth comes out." Joe raised his medal. "This medal isn't just mine. It belongs to everyone who fights for what's right." The applause lasted 10 minutes. After the Pentagon ceremony, Joe received a new offer. The Navy wanted him to be a consultant in the veteran PTSD program. "Your experience is very valuable," Admiral Hayes said. "You experienced 50 years of disappointment, then your rights were finally acknowledged. This story can give hope to veterans." Joe accepted. "Others shouldn't experience the injustice I went through." Joe was now doing not only maritime consulting in Florida, but also veteran counseling. The first counseling session was very impactful. Robert Miller, a Vietnam veteran, had been battling PTSD for 45 years. "No one understands me," Robert said. "People think we're heroes, but I feel worthless." Joe understood. "I also experienced disappointment for 50 years, but the problem isn't with us, it's with the system. How did you heal?" "When the truth came out, and my family supported me." This conversation changed Robert's life. 2 years later, Joe made a decision. He transferred the security company to David and went full-time into maritime security consulting. "I'm 74 years old now," he told David. "I want to share my Navy experience with more people." David supported him. "It's the right decision, Uncle. You can help a lot of people." Joe's new consulting company was named Sullivan Maritime Security. The logo featured the silhouette of USS Maddox. His first big project was at Miami Port. He reorganized the port security systems according to Navy standards. After the project, the Miami port manager congratulated Joe. "This security system is perfect. Your Navy experience is very valuable." Joe smiled. "I applied the systems I learned on USS Maddox 50 years ago." This success increased Joe's reputation. Florida's largest ports wanted to work with him. Today, Joe Sullivan is 72 years old, living with 2 separate missions. maritime security, and veteran support. 3 things hang on his office wall: a USS Maddox photograph, the Pentagon medal, and a photo taken with David. "Do you know what my greatest achievement is?" Joe asks. "David teaching me to face my past. Without him, the 50-year disappointment would have continued." David is proud of his uncle. "My uncle taught me the most important lesson. Don't be afraid to fight for what's right. Sooner or later, the truth comes out." If you enjoy these kinds of powerful stories, don't forget to subscribe to our Last Stand channel. We'll continue to bring you more hero stories every day. And remember, sometimes the greatest heroes are those who experience the greatest injustices. Listen to their stories, support them, because everyone has a story, and every story is valuable. Joe Sullivan's 50 years of silence wasn't just running from the past. It was the sadness of the injustice he experienced. But truth eventually comes out. "Justice comes late, but it always comes," Joe says. "I waited 50 years, but my rights were acknowledged." The injustice experienced on USS Turner Joy 50 years ago is now giving hope to thousands of veterans.